Anesthesiologist, what was something you won't forget hearing from someone that was under? Can I tell an Ambien story? It fits the spirit of the question. My mom worked the night shift for 15 years and couldn't sleep during the day, so her doctor prescribed her some Ambien so she could get some rest. I was young back then. One day, she poked her head into my room when she should have been sleeping with the most zonked out expression I've ever seen. Just opened my door, stared at me like a zombie, then shuffled away. She must have done the same thing to my little sister because she came into my room a second later, clearly horrified. We found my mom in the kitchen, sitting on the bench at the table in a daze. I grabbed the camcorder because this was just too weird. We tried to get her to go to bed, but she refused until we got her a cup of milk. We did, but she didn't drink it, just stared at it. So we helped her up and told her we were taking her to bed. She refused again and would only agree if she could put on her slippers. We walked her to her slippers, but she claimed she couldn't wear them because she only had 2 slippers but 4 feet. I told her no, she's got 2 feet like everyone else. She got irritated because she could obviously see 4 feet like a dog and she wasn't a dog. So we told her to put 2 of her feet in and go barefoot with her extra feet. She started doing a weird shuffle jump trying to get both feet into her slippers at the same time. Eventually, we managed to get her to bed. She remembered none of this when she woke up hours later. Luckily, I had the whole ordeal on tape, which she refused to watch out of embarrassment. She never took Ambien again. And that sounds like a scene straight out of a comedy movie. Story 2. One time, a male biology student in his early teens with a stuck kidney stone was being put under for surgery. Just as the anesthesiologist was pushing meds and telling me to count back from 100, I looked up at him, anesthetized but focused gaze, and said, "You're so pretty, you could be in movies." Then blackness. The anesthesiologist was like a grizzled old hunchback-looking guy with a lopsided grimace and more ear hair than head hair. The last thing I remember hearing was the OR nurses laughing. It was a smallish healthcare community, and I knew some of the people there, so to joke, somebody snuck his head into my chart. I like to think it was him going for a second career, though. Story 3. I had a guy with nefarious character, bad habit history, who got a bunch of ketamine in recovery from one of the other doctors to help with severe pain after his abscess drainage. I was asked to check on him in an hour as the other doctor had left for the evening. I went over and saw him in the K-hole, but otherwise fine, so I left and came back an hour later. First thing he says to me is, "Why did you do that to me?" I asked him what he meant, and he said, "You don't understand. I lived in another man's life in there." I apologized and asked him, "How long do you think you were in there?" For reference, it had been something like an hour and a half or 2 hours since his trip began. I don't know, maybe 30 years? I was speechless. I apologized again, made sure he knew he was safe, made sure he wasn't hurting, and made sure he knew it wasn't me that did it to him. Well, at least he got 30 years of life experience in under just 2 hours. Talk about efficiency. Story 4. This guy I was dating asked me to take him to get his wisdom teeth removed. He told me that anesthesia doesn't affect him a lot and we were supposed to go on a road trip the next day. Anyway, he gets wheeled out of the dentist by an old nurse. I'm behind the driver's seat and I see him strike his lips looking up at the sky. She opened my car door and he said, "I love her. I love her." He then proceeded to ask me to marry him several times. He tried to pull out his gauze and I told him to stop and he said, "Man, this lady is bossy." Then he wanted a milkshake. I would suggest a place and he would scream, "No." Finally, we agreed on a place and he tells me he'll give me directions. I drove for 15 minutes before I asked him what we're doing and he said he had no idea. We were in the drive-thru and he said, "I have something for you." I thought he had bought me a ring the way he had been proposing for the last hour. It was his newly extracted teeth and said, "They let me keep them. I want you to have them." He lived on base at the time and was yelling at the gate while they checked his ID for them to hurry up. I finally got him to his room, in bed. He's happily eating his milkshake with a spoon. His mouth was a mess of red liquid and milkshake. He asked me for a kiss. I gave him a peck. And we're married now. So she did accept his teeth proposal. A wise choice and a sweet story. Story 5. My mom woke up from dental surgery, and when we were leaving the surgeon's office, he gave her a goodie bag with floss and a toothbrush and stuff. And the whole way home, she kept asking if she could eat the candy that the dentist gave her. Every time I told her there was no candy, she looked so heartbroken like a little kid when their goldfish passes or something. So then we stopped at CVS on the way home and she wandered off. I found her in the candy aisle holding a giant bag of fun-sized candy, and when I told her to put it back on the shelf, she dropped it on the floor and galloped away laughing at me. Well, to be fair, candy and dental surgery generally don't mix well. Story 6. As an anesthesiologist and a Green Bay Packers fan, I proudly wear a scrub cap decked out in Packers colors and logo, whether it's a good day or a bad day. I was doing a pre-op evaluation on a kid who was a big New Orleans Saints fan, and when I walked into the room, his first words to me were, "Packers stink." I laughed and continued to prepare him and his family for his redo open heart surgery procedure. A few days later, fast forward to surgery, and his mom had come back to the OR and he was going to sleep. Given the fact that this was the third or fourth time he had a sternotomy going into the chest again, he had a higher possibility of major complications from the surgery. I started to push some meds to have him go to sleep while his mom was holding his hand, and as he drifted off, he said, "Wait, I have to tell my mom something." She got emotional, saying how much she loved him, and we were all waiting to hear what he had to say so urgently. I paused, giving him the medication, but he was already well on his way to being under, and as he drifted off to sleep, he said, "Packers stink. Kid did great. I hope he's doing well." Story 7. My little sister ended up in hospital as a kid many times for different reasons, but one time her life was definitely in danger. She was a total champ going through it while it was upsetting to my parents and me and our other siblings too. We didn't know if she was going to live or not, and the whole ordeal only lasted 5 days, but it felt like 5 months. We never spoke about it after it was all over and life just got back to normal. It wasn't until some years back where my sister and I were older and we were both home visiting our parents that we randomly started talking about that one time we almost lost her, and my parents and myself couldn't stop crying while my sister looked almost confused because it hadn't affected her the same way it did to us. I think when you're the one going through all that stuff, you may be more accepting of how things are, and maybe you cope better than those who love you who can only watch helplessly while other people are saving your life. Story 8. Fun story time. I went under for my 4 wisdom teeth when I was a teen. Pretty sure it was laughing gas, but when I woke up, I found myself with a mouth filled with cotton and red liquid. I told my nurse and my mother that I'll never be able to chew again with those teeth, and I started crying because I thought my teeth had all been removed. I kept biting firmly on the cotton and couldn't feel the rest of my face. Turns out I bit my lip accidentally. I started to lose red liquid, and then my mother tried to stop me, so I screamed, "Don't make me take your teeth, mother dearest." It went completely silent for a good minute in the entire office, and everyone broke out in laughter all at once. It was a good time. When I had a fall from my motorcycle last September, I literally told the cops and firefighters at the scene of my accident, the EMTs on the way to the hospital, and the doctors and nurses while I was there that all I want is a hammer. Why do you want a hammer? To knock myself out before the adrenaline wears off and all this pain strikes me. I didn't get any pain relief for 4 hours, all while dealing with MRIs, x-rays, and open surgery with no local anesthesia used and my wife watching. But at least they gave me some fentanyl before the scrubbing of my road rash on 15% of my body. The type of pain I wouldn't want to wish on my greatest enemy even. I wanted to end it all. The entire time I kept asking for pain meds, anything to make the pain slow down, and they didn't oblige. Probably mostly due to the possibility of danger of neck and head injury, but my helmet literally didn't touch the ground and I had it with me the entire time. Anyways, substances are fun. More people should have access to substances. I've had substances twice in the hospital, and let me tell you, it is some powerful stuff. It's amazing stuff, really. Seriously, get yourself some of that. Story 9. I've had to get colonoscopies every couple of years, so I've been under anesthesia quite a bit for my age. Each time I wake up crying, a nurse comforts me. They say I don't explain why I'm upset, but I'm sobbing every time. Now I warn the nurses not to take it too seriously if I start crying. At least I'm lucky not to make a mess along with the tears. I've learned to tell my anesthesiologist about this reaction so they can adjust my medication to help avoid it in the future. Not everyone gets put under for colonoscopies, which might vary by location. I'm in the US. Now, for those wondering, my mom passed away and they found 8 polyps. It's fascinating how many of us are in these unfortunate circumstances. And just a reminder, please do not delay if you have a family history of malady or if you're 45 or older. It's not fun, but it's not that bad and it can save your life. Story 10. I'm sure the anesthesiologist that did my son's dental surgery will never forget him, specifically because he came out after the fact, clearly trying very hard not to laugh to tell my wife about it. My son was just chatting away while he was getting ready. Now, my son is autistic and at the same time had a very distinct way of speaking and pattern of emphasis along with lips. So imagine you had a soundboard of Butters from South Park that had all these words on it from vastly different conversations, and then strung them together into sentences below, and you'll have a pretty decent idea of it. He sounds a bit different than my son, but it's about as close as I can get. Anyway, just as they're getting ready to put him under, he goes, "You're going to need some nighttime medicine because I have ADHD," and out practically snoring even. They get to work, finish up, and pull the mask off of him. The literal second the mask was off his nose, he bolts upright and finishes his sentence from however long earlier. That stuff doesn't work well on me. Story 11. My daughter had dental surgery, and I imagine the nurses remember her well. All 25 pounds of my young daughter woke up irritable and ready for something. She screamed and yelled so badly that I could hear her from the waiting room. They pulled us back early in the hope she would calm down when I got there, but nope, she just screamed just as loudly as me. She also refused to put her clothes back on, and at one point while I was trying to help her get dressed, she pushed me and whipped the garments off again. I wrapped her in a hospital blanket, carried her while resisting and screaming to the car and held her down, where she promptly fell straight to sleep. Woke up when she got home and was her sweet as pie little self again. As far as I can tell, she remembered none of it. It was absurd. Story 12. I had mine out in a hospital with tachycardia concerns, and I was given 2 Ativan to calm me. It made me uncharacteristically revealing about my feelings. So, as my bed was being wheeled down to the operating room, we came across 2 nurses walking by, and I asked them earnestly, "I know I'm a great big guy and full-grown man, but would someone hold my hand? I'm just a little nervous." Those 2 nurses both put down their stuff and reached for my hands. They held them all the way into the OR and put extra blankets from the warmer to make sure I felt at ease. They even searched me out later and post-op to check on me. That response, their sincere kindness, was a true revelation to me, and ever since that day, I've been brave to show my genuine emotion and feelings with others. It's made life immeasurably better. It's great that those nurses were there to hold your hand. Clearly, they understood the assignment. Story 13. I had a colonoscopy last month and I woke up rested and totally lucid. However, when my husband had his vasectomy after our son was born, they gave him a local anesthesia. It's an outpatient procedure and some Valium and pain meds after. He was loopy. I stopped at Walgreens to fill his prescription, and as he lolled in the passenger seat with an ice pack on him, he said, "Hey, will you get me a Coke?" I nod. "And some Doritos?" I nodded again and went off to leave the car, but he added, "And some Oreos, Reese's Cups, and Twizzlers?" We were old, well behind junk food years, and he was 6'2" and 170, neither obese nor a binge eater. I said, "Are you sure?" And he grinned and said, "Yeah." I grabbed the baby carrier and said, "I'm taking the baby with me." He literally did finger stunts. This man is a college professor who wears bow ties. I buy his snacks and pain meds and head back outside, and he is telling a guy at the Red Box video kiosk next to our car that his urologist said he had the best kind of male surgery for the procedure because he is very straight and uniform. I took him home quickly, gave him his snacks, and let him sleep it off. He woke up hours later covered in candy wrappers with orange Dorito fingers and asked, "What happened?" That was 13 years ago, and it's still the best. Story 14. I'm not an anesthesiologist, but this really rocked me. At the time, I had become really great friends again with my ex. He had been diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, and the first treatment was demanding. They had to remove 2/3 of his liver. After he was diagnosed, I was his main man for all visits and care, but that made me happy. So the day of his surgery took a very unnerving 4 hours. Thankfully, I had friends there to support me. Finally, someone came to me and said, "We're all done and he's asking to see you," with a smile. Although we weren't technically together then, apparently he had been asking for his boyfriend. As I walk in, I can hear him singing "Stand Back" and alternating that with bad words. When I finally got to him, he opened his eyes, saw me, and in the most genuine way anyone will ever tell it to me, he said, "I love you." I bawled as he fell asleep, then laughed every time he'd wake up, ask what happened, sing stand back, and yell. I married that man so hard, and I knew on that day that I would. Story 15. I didn't wake from anesthesia well and apparently became harsh, trying to escape by force. Due to my size, many security personnel have had to restrain me until I'm fully awake, though I have no memory of it. We discovered that if my wife is present when I wake up, I turn into a silent teddy bear. I just stare at her, quietly tell her I love her, and go along with anything she says without hesitation. We realized this after a surgery where I was apparently yelling and throwing things while trying to escape the hospital, though I have no memory of it. My wife heard the commotion from the waiting area and came over. The moment I saw her, I stopped, said, "Oh, hi, I love you," and instantly calmed down. After that, since I had to undergo many surgeries on the same arm, they always made sure she was there when I woke up. With these last two stories, who knew love would be like the ultimate anesthesia antidote? Maybe they should just start giving out emotional support spouses instead of those boring hospital blankets, right? Story 16. One summer when my sister was young back then, she got herself caught in a bicycle chain while riding double. At the ER, after they gave her pain meds, she kept screaming, "I hate you, Shell, you're not my friend anymore." Shell was the neighbor who had been riding with her. My mom was mortified that her child was screaming like that. Once they calmed her down, they gave her a coloring book and crayons. She tried to eat the brown crayon thinking it was a candy bar. On the way home, she started singing Jingle Bells and pointed at the traffic lights, calling them pretty Christmas lights. My brother and I still tease her about it, saying, "Shell, you're not my friend anymore." Story 17. It's worth mentioning that my mom has an unusually good tolerance to anesthesia. When she was young, she underwent open heart surgery. About halfway through, she woke up, observed the procedure for a moment, and then startled the surgeon by asking some things. 20 years later, she walked into his office carrying baby me. At first, he tried to have her out, saying, "Nope, get out, I do pediatrics, not old people." But then he saw my little cleft lip self and said, "There's another one of you?" A few years later, I was having a face or a wrist surgery, and while they waited to make sure I was fully out, I inherited some of my mom's tolerance. I apparently started telling them that different things were odd, like their scrubs, how cold the stethoscope and room were, and how my stuffed toy duck agreed with me. I remember absolutely none of this, but the doctors recounted it to my mom and I'm teased for it. Then when I was about a teen, I believed I was coming out of it and touching my thumb to my pinky and was very proud of my accomplishment. At my last major surgery, as I finally woke up, I had the oxygen tubes in my nose because I kept forgetting to breathe. When my doctor told me, I informed him that oxygen is no use. Man had known me since before I could talk, and just a few months later, I was loopy because needles aren't my friend, and he had to deal with me laughing for like 10 minutes because his student said, "The length of the needle doesn't matter, it's the girth," which was the last time I was his patient. On a cute note though, we made plaster molds of my hands before and after the main chunk of my hand surgeries and gave them to him. Made the otherwise stoic man sob, and they were still displayed on his desk the last time I was there. And if you're enjoying the video and getting a little bit of a grin at least from one of these stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. Not an anesthesiologist, but this is my little story. When I was put under for my wisdom teeth, I started to have an anxiety concern. I have general anxiety problems, and pain in my left arm is usually a sign of anxiety coming on, but don't worry, my heart is good. It's just nerve damage. So my left arm was going numb and I started to freak out. The doctor decided to give me some laughing gas to calm me down, and when I started giggling and laughing, everyone else calmed down and my surgeon was ready to put me to sleep. Well, the room spun and suddenly I went into fight or flight mode and began to struggle to get out. I don't really remember much, but I was screaming and thrashing. Nurses and doctors were called to hold me down. Absolute pandemonium. Now, mind you, I'm a short, skinny teenage girl, but I'll tell you that anxiety makes you pretty strong when you want to leave. So, as I'm going under, I'm still fighting and screaming, even unconscious, and the nurses are escorting my mom out even though technically I wasn't really under. I woke up when the surgery was done, confused and very quiet. The nurse told me that I looked very sleepy and unsure of where I was, and right as she was going to call my mom, I asked for a woman named Claudia. I don't know anyone named Claudia though, so it was kind of weird. I was completely out of it. You could have me do anything and I would have done it. As we were leaving, my mom overheard one of the surgeons say, "I have never seen someone fight the anesthesia like that before." So that's my little claim to fame in the dentist field as someone who almost got himself harmed to free himself from anesthesia. Story 19. I'm really disappointed I missed this, but I'll share my thoughts anyway. I was called to help with an ortho procedure for a middle school age boy. I was on call and it was during the night, so I went to see him in the pre-op holding area and ask him and his family about med history and everything that's needed before we took him to the OR. He was quiet and let mom do all the talking, which isn't uncommon for that age or for that time of night. I finish asking all my questions and start to roll him back to the OR, and as is custom, I try to get the kid to warm up to me a little bit by asking simple, easy questions. Kid gave me nothing, barely a shrug. All right, no big deal. He's either nervous or shy or tired. I'll just do what I need to do. The whole time, setting him up, putting on ECG leads, pulse ox, pre-oxygenating, he says nothing. I go to induce him with the anesthetic and let him know he'll be asleep in a few seconds. He takes the medicine like a champ. People just don't remember it after surgery. Then all of a sudden, he sits up and at the top of his lungs, he screams, "I'm going to sleep," then lays back down. That was it. When it happens, the nurse in the OR is just trying to make sure he doesn't fall out of bed. But as soon as she can tell he's out, we just look at each other and lose it. Most insane thing I've witnessed in my 6 years experience so far. Story 20. I'm an anesthesiologist here, and to be honest, it's kind of tough to decipher what most people are saying as they're getting induced. Most times they think they are talking but are actually just mumbling. Also, when the mask is on your face, it is difficult to actually hear what you're saying, so I just reply something like, "Yes, yes, have a nice dream." One that sticks out with, however, I wasn't from the OR but in the ICU. I was a call resident in the TSICU team at a level 1 center one day. A grieving patient that we had transferred out the day prior to the floor team developed a STEMI that morning. ST of elevation, myocardial infarction, went to the cath lab and was transferred back to the ICU in the early evening. Around 9 p.m., he started to stop taking his medication and became short of breath. I decided to intubate him. The last thing he said before I pushed the substances was, I'm losing this battle." I remember talking with his night nurse that morning and she brought up those words as she had heard them too. I remember replying that it turned out that he was right. I still think about those last words from time to time. Yeah, and when the mask is gone, it's a bit like trying to have a conversation underwater too. Sad to hear about this ending though. Story 21. Not an anesthesiologist, but this is quite the fun story. My friend was getting her wisdom teeth out. Her boyfriend and I took her to the dental surgeon. The assistant comes out and gives us the rundown of what happened while the doctor is finishing up. Her boyfriend and I are both pre-med, so we're talking about the surgery and medication and all that. Doctor brings her out a few minutes later, and we help her get into the car and tell her boyfriend that she has been unfaithful to him a week ago, but she did it with a laugh in a loopy way. We're both in the car, stunned. I kind of knew but said nothing. He says they'll talk about it when we get back. We get her back to her apartment and she instantly goes to bed because she's tired. No words are exchanged. She woke up like 30 minutes later and was laughing about how insane she must have been on Laffy Gas and asking us what she said because she doesn't remember anything. Her boyfriend tells her what she said and is mad about it. She claims that she was loopy and just saying random things and gets mad at him for not believing her. He says he knows she's lying and she thinks I was the one that told him it's true and it's my fault he found out. The thing is, when we were talking to the dental assistant, she told us all they used was local anesthetic. The only thing they gave her was air to help the breathing beforehand, like the type they have in airplanes. No nitrous oxide since the teeth were easy to remove. She says patients often mistake it for Laffy Gas and it's funny to see if they fake a reaction because it's a placebo. So she basically was blaming it on the loopy gas, not knowing she didn't even receive any laugh gas at all. Story 22. I never thought I'd share this, but here it goes. A long time ago, I had surgery on my hand. It was a straightforward outpatient procedure. As a younger white man, I consider myself to be open-minded and not prejudiced. My girlfriend took me and stayed with me until they wheeled me into the operating room. I don't even recall the countdown before I woke up from anesthesia. The nurse in the recovery ward was laughing at me when she came to check in on me. She looked red, clearly embarrassed. I asked if I slipped out of my gown or something while I checked myself over. She refused to say, but I noticed that everyone was staring at me, some in shock, others in obvious pain, holding back a laugh. A few faces that looked back were filled with something dark, annoyance and bitterness. My girlfriend, who is half Nigerian, half German, was there waiting in the lobby, grinning ear to ear. I was pretty annoyed that everyone was treating me like I just came out of surgery with an odd grafted to my forehead. She wouldn't peep, vexing me further. She waited until the ride home to tell me that while I was going under, I kept repeating the phrase, nah, 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 over and over again in a deep plantation southern accent. My surgeon was an African American. I will forever be grateful that my biracial girlfriend was there to act as a character witness. I was mortified. I still am, but I guess time heals all wounds. Needless to say, I asked to be referred to a different doctor for follow ups. I don't have any clue where I may have heard the phrase before, and certainly never have I used it either. Story 23. I'm apparently quite entertained when waking up from anesthesia. After my wisdom teeth removal, I asked the nurse in recovery for nachos since I hadn't eaten the night before. When she said no, I broke down crying as if she had kicked my dog, and I reportedly didn't stop for 2 hours, according to my mom. Also, somewhat off topic, I started and completed the entire game of Portal 2 that day, and was confused the next day about how I had earned all the trophies. During my colonoscopy, I apparently swore at the nurses in a lighthearted way and asked the doctor if I was as full of a mess as everyone claims I am, though no one actually says that to me. During my endoscopy, I woke up in the recovery room to my mom whisper shouting at me to knock it off because I was loudly declaring how nice my then boyfriend's bum was. Fair enough, it was like two Pringles hugging, very nice. I also started shouting for ice cream because my throat hurt, but I didn't get any, which made me very sad. So those are my stories. I don't remember much, but I'm glad I was a source of entertainment for the staff and an embarrassment to my parents. Story 24. A little late and probably not going to be noticed, but here it goes. 2 years ago, my boyfriend went in to get all his 4 wisdom teeth pulled, dropped him off, went home. After 2 to 3 hours, the nurse calls me because he's ready to be picked up. I'm bringing this up because I can clearly hear him yelling in the background. He's arguing with the doctor, and he's upset he's losing red liquid in his mouth and wants said doctor to fix it. As I arrived, I let the nurse know I'm ready and waited. Here come 2 nurses, carrying him to the truck, red liquid seeping out of his mouth, drool all over his shirt, bad bedhead, and obviously under the influence of substance. I started laughing. They open up the truck door and let me know that he is one feisty patient. Apparently, after the procedure, when he was awake, the doctor stated, "I'm going to put this gauze in your mouth, okay?" "Is that a pitfall?" he said. Then started to protest that there was red liquid in his mouth and to make the red liquid stop. When the doctor said there was nothing he can do to fix that, my boyfriend then shouted, "Then put my wisdom teeth back." Before he got out to the truck, he asked one of the nurses if I would notice the red liquid. Story 25. I literally just had a procedure on Friday taking my wisdom teeth. According to my wife, my statements were as follows. "I'm the Bee Gees guy, baby." Followed by a rendition of "Staying Alive." This makes sense as I was very nervous about having issues with the anesthesia. "Don't film me. I'm the Red Baron under here, the flying ace." And when they told me to drink the ginger ale through the straw, I assured them it was good, but it was spicy. I also vividly remember having a conversation with the entire operating room about my love for dogs as I was going under. The surgeon who stitched my face after a dog bite 15 years ago happened to be the one performing my surgery. He was showing off the emergency room photo to everyone in the room, and we were both quite proud of it. I recall that he doesn't like dogs, which slightly affects my personal opinion of him, but professionally, I wouldn't trust anyone else in the area. The nurses laughed as we discussed all the different methods, and then they said, "Why don't you try the slide?" And I said, "Yes, the electric slide." It's great to share and reminisce about these experiences together. It makes for some memorable stories and connections. Story 26. Honestly, I often hear similar stories, and even the funny ones tend to blend together in my memory. I usually prefer not to engage in conversation with my parents during sedation cases since it's mostly one-sided. I typically keep them under very deep sedation, but not so deep that intubation is necessary. One time, I do remember keeping an elderly lady awake during a spinal procedure for her hip replacement. I remember talking to her in pre-op with a young lady who I thought was her daughter because they had a very close relationship. Turns out it was her social worker. The patient herself had no family. She was raised in foster care and had no children herself. Her significant other had passed away, and she did not know her biological family. She lived in a nursing home, and she did not make any friends because those other people in the nursing home were older than her, and many of them had dementia. She seemed like a very kind and reasonable person despite what I thought was a really tough hand being drawn for her. So basically, I kept her company as the orthopedic surgeon was drilling into her because I felt she would be lonely otherwise. Story 27. I worked in surgery and was around when patients came around in the theater for just-in-case moments. I've seen people wake up like nothing happened, seen patients just pretty groggy, a handful of restless patients, and a couple rather hostile patients. A few patients have confessed their love for the anesthesiologist or the anesthetic nurses, some mumble nonsense, of course. When I got my surgery, of course, the staff all knew me, and while I was in the anesthetic room and could see into the scrub room, the scrub nurse was doing the finger across the throat thing and making odd motions and all that. Mostly amusing, but when I got back to the ward all groggy, I thought the reflection on the TV was the actual TV and freaked out a little because I didn't hear the TV. That, and I wanted my IV out so bad. Story 24. About 4 years ago, I injured the long head of my right arm in a single move, and when I was going into surgery to have them repaired, the anesthesiologist said he was giving me a nerve block and that I shouldn't feel much pain. I woke up before they even got me back to recovery and can remember yelling, "That nerve block didn't do, he lied," as they spun me around in circles and twirled that bed through the hallway. That story helped out last summer though because I messed up the same shoulder, this time with 100% tears. My surgeon said he'd been doing shoulders and knees for over a decade and mine was the worst he'd seen. Going into that surgery, I told the anesthesiologist about the complete failure of his predecessor. The syringe of local medicine that he busted my nerves in was the size of a Red Bull can and I barely felt anything for the next 18 hours. But of course, then I felt everything when it wore off at 1 a.m., but I can't blame that guy for it. He was awesome. Story 29. As an anesthetic nurse, I can assure you that patients don't say anything while under anesthesia. They are in a deep sleep and usually paralyzed with an endotracheal ET tube or an airway device in their mouth. While it would be entertaining if they did say something silly, it simply doesn't happen. If a patient were to twitch, we would deepen the anesthesia immediately. Nowadays, we can monitor brain function with BIS, which gives us a numerical reading on our monitors, allowing us to adjust the anesthetic to suit each patient. So once a patient is induced and stable, a typical anesthetic is quite uneventful. Story 30. I'm not an anesthesiologist, but I genuinely feel sorry for the ones who have to put me under anesthesia. It's not just about the things I say while I'm under. It's more about the unpredictable actions I display when I'm out of it. The very first time I was put under was for major dental work, and when the procedure was complete, the doctor asked me if I remembered anything from the experience. When I replied no, he told me that was a good thing, but then he proceeded to explain what had happened during the procedure. It turns out that if they don't administer enough anesthesia to keep me completely unconscious, I became quite hostile and starting trying to tussle the doctors. Thankfully, this incident took place in a military hospital, so they had plenty of manpower to manage the situation. As I've had more operations later in life, I always try to warn the healthcare teams about my reaction to anesthesia, emphasizing the importance of strapping me down to prevent any outbursts. However, many doctors initially dismiss my concerns as an over-exaggeration until they witness my behavior firsthand. Now, the VA has even made it a standing order on my medical chart to ensure proper precautions are taken. Of course, it has also been challenging to explain to girlfriends over the years why I can't have them sleep in bed with me or why they shouldn't wake me up. I tend to wake up fiercely, which can be alarming for them. Fortunately, my current girlfriend, with whom I've been for 16 years, understands my situation and knows how to handle it. Interestingly, the first time I came out from anesthesia, I also experienced something memorable. I saw the music video for Cher's Believe. That video is quite trippy and has stuck with me as a surreal memory of that awakening. Story 31. I'm not an anesthesiologist, but I have had 14 surgeries and I have 3 favorite stories related to my experiences with anesthesia. Now, the first story, which occurred earliest in this timeline, was during one of my plantar wart surgeries. I unexpectedly woke up in the middle of the surgery and heard someone exclaim, "Oh, that's not supposed to happen." I'm not sure if they were referring to something going wrong with their procedure or my waking up, but I do know that this was also the surgery, so it could have been either. The second story involves my gallbladder surgery. At the time, I was in college, so I was neither young nor particularly afraid. Having already undergone 13 surgeries, I felt no anxiety about this one. As they were preparing to put me under, I felt a comforting presence on my hand. I looked over to see my surgeon holding my hand. He had come in early before scrubbing in to hold my hand as I fell asleep. I have no idea why that gesture meant so much to me, but it has truly stuck with me for the last decade. The third and final story is also from my gallbladder surgery. When I was waking up in the recovery room, the nurse gave me pain medication and told me I could go back to sleep. After she left, I remember bursting into tears and trying to sob as quietly as possible. When she returned to check on me a few minutes later, she found me a blubbering mess and insisted that I need to sleep off more of the anesthesia to feel better. All I wanted was for her to send my sister in. I kept begging, but she kept saying I needed to sleep first. In my frustration, I ended up cursing at her, demanding that my sister be allowed into the recovery area. I distinctly remember shouting, "I'll go back to sleep once my sister is here." Unbeknownst to me, once family is brought back, it signals the path to discharge. Eventually, they brought my sister in, and I was told I had to go home. I sincerely apologized to that nurse. It was the only time I've been difficult with medical professionals. A few years later, during my 14th surgery at the same facility, I vowed to myself and silently to my nurses that I would wake up, take my pain meds, and go back to sleep without a fight. However, when I woke up this time, they didn't give me the option to go back to sleep. Instead, they gave me my meds and immediately called my dad back to the recovery area. At that moment, all I wanted to do was go back to sleep. Story 32. This isn't a funny story and doesn't quite fit the prompt, but reading all these posts is making me remember my only experience under anesthesia. I grew up in a neglectful home. When I was a teenager, I got my wisdom teeth out. Afterward, I woke up in a dark room, shaking uncontrollably because I was really cold. I was able to talk but didn't know if it was okay to ask for help, so I just lay there and shook until someone noticed. I don't know how long it took, but it felt like ages. They took me to a room to watch a video with post-op instructions where my mother joined me. She was supposed to be paying attention to the content because I was supposed to be too groggy to remember any of it. I remember the whole time pep talking to myself, "Wake up, focus, you can't miss this because she isn't going to pay attention." I managed to absorb most of the video and I was feeling pretty normal by the end of it, and for the record, I was right. The nurses were going to help me to the car and they were very surprised that I didn't end up on the floor after I stood up too quickly. I was fine. I was pretty much awake by that point, possibly through sheer force of will. The whole experience was really lonely and isolating and makes me sad looking back. I love reading all of the stories of people who felt safe and loved after coming out of anesthesia and did silly things, and even the ones who didn't feel so safe and fought the nurses. Story 33. I've got an opposite story. I was sitting in the OR watching my wife have an emergency C-section. The nurse anesthesiologist was too preoccupied with teaching her student than actually paying attention to the surgery. First, she decided to quiz her student on the different types of the same condition my wife had. She even managed to loudly point out my wife had the worst version of it. Then, when the scalpel was used, the surgeons were scrambling to keep my wife alive. I knew what was going on and was shocked I was still in the room. Not only did this lady fail to get me out of the room, but even worse, she failed to put my wife to sleep. At one point, the surgeon yelled, "I can't get them back in," and my wife casually asked, "Get what in?" The surgeon looked up and you could tell he was shocked and livid. He apologized later. My wife has PTSD now. We were told we have a strong civil case, but we couldn't pursue it because my wife was in PA school and didn't want to burn bridges. The anesthesiologist found me in a hallway and gave me some parking passes out of his wallet. That was weird. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.